So, Charlotte, it's a distinct pleasure to do this.
My pleasure, too.
And I might say that we're here in the studio of Lenore Hecht, a longtime supporter of the work.
In Manhattan.
That's right. Well, Charlotte, could you tell us how it is that you first became aware of sensory awareness and aware that it was a practice for you?
This is a long time ago. Oh, it must be way back about 1952, 51, 52. I was living in Connecticut, working at the Institute of General Semantics there. And the director of the Institute, Miss Kendig, knew Laura Thompson and John Collier, who were working with and students of Charlotte Silver. So knowing of my interests, Miss Kendig had gotten an announcement of Charlotte's classes by mail. And she passed it to me and she said, "You might be interested in this." And so I kept it because, of course, I was interested, and that, again, is a kind of a long story. I was ready to study it in many ways. I was interested for years teaching at the Institute in relaxation, different periods of relaxation, different ways that people had of dealing with it. And in fact, at the seminars of General Semantics, Korzybski insisted that everybody should become relaxed because he felt that it was not only verbal work that was needed, awareness of how we speak and think, but awareness of our organism. And so everybody had to learn this method that was developed at the Institute. And I was the one who was doing that. And we called it semantic awareness. It was really a way of feeling ourselves. So for years I had been teaching this, you see, at the seminars. And about 1951, before I had heard of Charlotte Silver, I wrote a little article about different types of relaxation. And this was published in our bulletin. I was studying different methods, Chafferson's, a half a dozen different methods. And I had come across Perles's Gestalt Therapy, and I was really reviewing that book. And then I got involved with, well, what are other ways of dealing with this? And so I was describing them in this article. And so I was just open to learn more. Here's another method. Here's something that I had not heard of before. Sensory awareness. I don't think it was called that at that time, perhaps about 1952 or so. Nevertheless, when I took a trip to New York, which was quite seldom in those days, I decided to visit one of Charlotte's classes. So I had gotten on her list, her mailing list. And so I arranged to visit a certain class on 57th Street, where she had a studio at that time. And I attended the class. I certainly enjoyed it, but then I had to go back to Connecticut. And when I got married and moved to New York, then she realized where my new address was, and she sent me announcements of her classes. So it was not until, several years later, about 19 must have been 55, that I had gotten this announcement of a special 2-month series of classes that dealt with breathing. And I thought, oh, this is my opportunity. I'm going to see what this is like. So I think it was about April 55, imagine, 95. Ah, many, many years ago. I went to these classes. I think they met twice a week, and then I was hooked. And no classes during the summer at that time. But in the fall, I went back. And that's how it started, actually. And then I was very impressed. And I thought, well, this is something that the students who come to study General Semantics should learn. So I didn't teach the work in relaxation, but I asked Charlotte to come and teach at our seminars. And she did this for several years. And they loved it, of course. And in the meantime, I had learned more about the work and came to feel that I could do this, I could present it. And so then I taught the work. And then I began having classes in New York. I gave a series of classes. Actually, my first class was, I rented a studio in the Carnegie Building, way up high, and had a class. That was the first one. A series of classes for over months. And I rented another place on 57th Street. So I had classes there. And then I gradually, I did give some workshops in New York too, on weekends. But mostly it was at the seminars. But I had my place in the teaching of the work, which was both scientific and the principles of General Semantics. And my area was to convince the students that we evaluate not only by words, but with our whole organism. So that's how it started.
Well, you've mentioned General Semantics and the principles of General Semantics, and I'm wondering if you can tell us what those principles are so that those people who are only familiar with sensory awareness would learn something of General Semantics.
You see, the name General Semantics is misleading, and we keep trying to find a better name, but it's a little late now. Because it deals not only with the way we use words, how we evaluate and how we think, feel, but I used to give a lecture to the students before I would begin the classes. And I would tell them something like this. Our whole organism is involved in evaluating anything. It's because we don't separate thinking from feeling. Whenever we think about anything, some feelings go with it. We may not be aware of them, but they happen. And so we must think in terms of the whole organism. And I used to describe a picture. In fact, I had the picture that Kravitsky used to have on the wall. During World War II, there was a picture of about 6 privates standing up with a shovel and a sergeant standing in front of them. And he said to one of these privates standing with a shovel, "You on the end there, wipe that opinion off your face." And the point was that we'd have opinions not only on our faces, but all over us. And so if we think that we're just in our heads, this is a misconception, and we must realize the state of our whole organism and how it's functioning. Oh, I could speak for an hour on this, but I'm not going to now.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to convince them, you see, that there was a relationship between what happens in our body and what happens in our thinking. And they were sometimes surprised at that because they didn't expect that at an Institute of General Semantics seminar. But they loved it. They loved the work. And so I think I made a little headway in helping them to realize that you can't separate these. But you see, this was at least 40 years ago. These days, we may think of this as, well, of course, everybody knows that. But then it was new. This was something different. And it was unusual for a person, when they talked about thinking, to include how does our body respond. Now, the principles of general semantics deal with the relationship between our words and what the words stand for, but it includes our reactions. Our awareness of being in touch with what goes on, an awareness of how our words, the structure of the way we speak, corresponds with what the structure of what goes on. This is a big subject. It's very simple, but it's not easy. It involves so many things. Our perception, how we see, how we think, how we feel, how we connect, how much in touch we are with where we are, what we observe, how we react to it, where our expectations get in the way, what order of abstraction we're on. For instance, do we go around thinking about generalities, like speaking in terms of it always rains when I want to go out, feeling, say, you know, people make these big statements and generalities which are not really fitting the facts. And we go by these high order abstractions and inferences rather than looking at the facts. And one of the important principles in general semantics is to observe and be in touch with what goes on and realize that we all have to abstract because we're human, but let's bring our higher abstractions down to earth and see if they fit this particular situation that we're in. So that in sensory awareness, we also learn to get closer to what goes on around us, how we react to it, the relationship between our feelings, our thinking, and how we function in our world, how we communicate. So there are many, many ways in which these two link together. The emphasis is different, but there are many overlappings. So that's, in a nutshell, some of the main principles. Mm-hmm. So it was natural for me to see some connections and to realize that here is a method in sensory awareness to become more keen and more in touch with ourselves and in relation to what goes on around us. And then I emphasize it's important not only to know what goes on in us, but our relationship with what goes on in our surroundings. Because I think we can become too concerned with, oh, I have a pain here. Oh, I don't feel right here. But this work in sensory awareness is much broader than that, because we are interested not only in what is happening in us, but how do we deal and function in this world? How do we communicate with other people? What kind of connection do we have? This is really so fundamental in living. So I continue to teach this, and some people like to follow one aspect of it. For some people, it's hard to get in touch. But you can see that there's a lot of connection.
At one time I heard you say that one of the core principles of sensory awareness is feeling and allowing the changes that are needed in your organism. And I'm wondering if you could expand on that.
This involves getting in touch with ourselves. And accepting what goes on. It's so important, I feel, to accept, not to criticize ourselves. I say, oh, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that. But to accept what goes on. We all have built up habits over the years, and we all could function a little better than we do. Some people much more, some people not so much. But to allow what we feel is needed. This is a big thing, you know. It's really so fundamental, at least in my view, is to allow what is needed. If, for instance, we feel we want more air, do we allow it? We need to be interested, not in a too critical way, but just interested. How can I meet this situation better? In order to meet a situation, you have to be in touch with the situation. To say to ourselves, what does this situation ask for? What is needed to do so and so? To allow what is needed. Do we need more air? Do we need more keen observation? Do we need more silence? Oh, that's another important aspect of it, isn't it? To be able to be quiet. And this is important in General Semantics too. To be silent on the objective level, as Kordybsky used to say. Silence on the level of the senses. Because if we're always talking to ourselves, saying, giving comments to ourselves, talking to ourselves or to somebody else, how we feel, what we think, well, there's no chance for anything new to come in. We're just so full of words in our heads. As Wendell Johnson, who wrote this marvelous book in People in Quandaries, said, our words get in our eyes. Our words get in our ears. And we get so stuffed with words reminds me in Zen, for instance, like pouring water into a teacup. You pour and you pour and you pour. Well, the teacup is full. You can't take in any more. So if you're full of words and you're thinking, you can't take in what's going on at the moment. So allowing, and we can ask that of ourselves all the time. Are we allowing this? Are we allowing space around the shoulder? Are we allowing our head to move? Are we allowing ourselves to see? This is something that we can continue to ask. In sensory awareness, it's so important. I feel it's allowing and accepting. But it doesn't mean that anything goes. That is, you accept something as this is what is going on. Is this what we want? Well, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to be like this? Do we want this to go on? Or would we like to function a little bit more easily, more clearly, and more joyfully? What would we like? And can we allow it? So this I think is a key point in being able to allow, and it's not so simple, as I'm sure you know.
And I'm thinking also of how it is that you are in groups, whether it's the Monday night group or when we meet in the Leaders Guild, of also feeling out the situation in the group, and then allowing the changes that need to occur in order to function as a group. Is that true?
Oh, yes. It really means not going by something that you have in your head necessarily, but responding to what is needed by that particular situation. Being willing to let go of something that we wanted to do for the sake of bringing about better clarity or whatever is needed. If we're too set in what we want to do, we don't respond to what is needed for a situation. Yes, whoever is teaching needs to see what is needed. Does that person need more clarification? Does that person doesn't have the understanding that it's needed? How can I help that person, and so on? Sometimes I think we might turn our attention to what is required, what is best needed for offering the work. And that would be one of them, to be able to sense what is happening in a group. To have a clear notion of what is needed to help different people. Maybe the legs are too far apart, maybe they're too close together, maybe there's not enough space here or there. We do need, in offering it, to be right there with a person, to be receptive, and that's something Charlotte Silver spoke of quite a bit, being responsive, being awake and responsive, being alive and responsive, and knowing that you are there to help, you are there to offer the work, and being responsive to what is needed to help that situation, whatever it is. So that's one aspect of offering it.
Is there anything that in offering the work that you prepare before offering a class, or is it just how it is that you live your life that prepares you to offer a class?
Well, if I'm leading, say, our group, it will be different than leading a class that hasn't worked for a long time. So part of this is, what is the background of the persons that we're trying to reach? If it's people that are new, it's a different thing than if it's people that have worked with us. We have to realize that new people don't see things quite the way we do yet. So we have to reach them in a way which touches their own needs and the level that they are on. And so many factors enter: their age, their experience, their condition. So if it's a Monday, say one of our groups, we will work together, I usually think of some sort of theme I like to work with, say communicating, or being in contact with something, or different ways of being aware of breathing, some theme, and then what are different ways in which some experiments can help people to get closer to that. So I prepare in the way that I'd like to present a particular class, but then of course it depends. It never turns out exactly as you plan, but some general feeling of the direction you would like to go at that time. But of course you have to be ready to change any moment, depending on what is needed right then and there. But anyway, this is the way I operate.
What I'm reminded of is when we left the studio at 73rd Street, and if you remember, I asked you if you would offer the last class there.
Mm-hmm.
And do you remember anything about that class?
Yes.
I wish you would share it with the people who are watching this video.
We had been in this class, which many of us associated for so many years with Charlotte and Charles. So they taught there, Charlotte taught there for many years, and some of us quite attached to it. It was a peaceful, harmonious place, a quiet place, and we were very, very sorry to have to leave it, going in someplace we didn't know. Well, I think I clearly wanted us to experience the actual leaving, the necessity of leaving, but not to dwell too much on the sad part of it, but being open to the new possibilities. So it was a mixture in my own recollection of it, of facing the fact that this must happen, and it is only natural to feel reluctant at leaving. But let's not be bogged down with feeling sorry for ourselves. Let's realize that that's the way life is. We have something, we must be willing to let it go. For me, it was just facing what needed to be faced and realizing when something was finished. What I remember was a story I told about a cat. Do you remember that story?
No, but I remember another one. Let's hear yours first.
I see. Well, you tell the other one, and I'll tell the story of the cat. I read about a cat who was ill, and the owners had to take it and be put away. And this cat seemed to have a feeling that this was the end, and it went around to each place in the yard and sat for a few moments to get the feel here. And it sat in another place that it loved to sit before, there. And slowly it went to these special places where the cat used to enjoy being. And when the cat was ready, it came to the owners, and they took it and went to the vet with it. This somehow stays with me. It realized what had to be. Now, I don't remember the other story right now. Maybe you tell it, perhaps.
I'd like to first say that we left that studio at the end of December. Help me out, folks. When was that? It was
Must have been about 2 years ago.
2 years. So December of '97. And Charlotte Silver was here in September of '97. And we didn't know how long we would have the studio at that time. And she had materials from long, long ago there, and she went through some of those materials. But she also went from place to place to place. Well, the story I remember was that you began by telling that during World War II you became aware of something called the scorched earth policy. And you decided that you wanted to create a dance on this. That's how you began the class. And for me, it helped put so much our not having the studio any longer into a much larger perspective. Do you now remember starting that way?
Yes. Yes, I remember that dance done to Caesar Franck. I was impressed by what would it feel like to have to give up your home? Not only give it up, leave it, but destroy it yourself and go away. Scorched earth policy, yes. To realize that you had to do this, and the feeling of loving it, and then getting the energy to actually destroy it yourself and turn away and go away. Yes, it does give a feeling that this is not something isolated. This is a human experience. How many people have to do this? It is bad enough to have to leave your home and have an enemy destroy it, but to destroy it yourself and leave it is different. Yes, I remember that, yes.
And I also remember that at one point you shared with me you had a class or classes with Harold Kreutzberg.
Yes.
That's when you lived in the Midwest and you were intent on a career in dance at that time?
Yes, in Chicago.
Uh-huh. So I'm wondering if you could kind of indicate how you evolved from an interest in dance and then you came into General Semantics.
Yes. Yes,
You've lived a long time, Charlotte, so I have a lot of questions.
Yes, I've always been interested in physical education. I was a sort of tomboy when I grew up. Baseball, basketball, field hockey, tennis, and all that. So when I went to the university, I was what they called at that time a phi ed. But I went to see a performance of their dance organization. And at that time, Margaret Dobler at the University of Wisconsin was teaching. She was famous in teaching dance. I saw these girls, they were all girls at that time, dancing with scarves in this beautiful studio. I felt, that's it, that's what I want to do. So I didn't continue in that. But I didn't have quite enough credits to graduate with a major. I was studying, excuse me, I was studying science, and my favorite class was human anatomy. I just thought that was so fascinating. And I loved these classes that showed life. So I was studying zoology. Well, I was going to teach science, but I really think it's much better if I didn't, because I think that what I did do, I'm glad I did it. So I was, but it was during the Depression, the Great Depression as they now call it, in the 1930s. And, well, I still wanted to teach dancing. I won't go into all the details of that. That would take another 2 hours. But I had to earn my living somehow. And so I found that, well, I had heard of this man, Korzybski, and I never heard of General Semantics. There wasn't much to read at that time. And never heard of the man, but I had a friend who was going to go to his seminar, and she said, well, why don't you come along? And so I said, all right. So I went along, and I became interested. So when I went back to Chicago, I didn't have a job, but I did work part-time at the Institute. And there I studied dance with Ann Rudolph. And I joined her group, and we used to perform in Chicago. So I was interested, you see, in physical education and dance and physical work. So that's part of my background. So I carried that over into General Semantics. I said during the war, when they needed help very badly at the Institute, I couldn't keep up. It was just too exhausting to work at the Institute and then go off to teach dance and to in my classes. And it was more than I could deal with, so I said, all right, I'll work for 1 year full-time at the Institute. Well, that 1 year went on and on. And the Institute moved from Chicago to Connecticut, and I with it. So no more dancing because there was no opportunity. So I was glad to continue, you see, with sensory awareness because it fits so closely with what I love to do and what I felt was needed. So I combined them in my own feeling and in my teaching. I combined all these. And so I guess it's a rather unique combination, but that was it.
I'm just wondering, with sensory awareness, how how it is that you represent the work in your way. And I'm just wondering how you would speak of what sensory awareness is added to your life or highlighted in your life, or...
Well, that's a crucial thing for all of us who study sensory awareness. What has it to do with the way I live my life?
Right.
For everybody, it's different. There's an attitude that I feel is so fundamental, and I'm so grateful to Charlotte Silver for pointing out and often saying it's a question of attitude. And that for me, this is so true. Our attitude toward ourselves, our attitude toward other people, our attitude toward life around us, our attitude toward our work. It's all involved with a big term, attitude. And as I studied attitude, the word attitude, in fact, I wrote a review of a book by Nina Bull, a wonderful person, years ago, about attitude. That the attitude has a root of being both mental and physical. It's an attitude that we can think and feel, and it is also manifested in every tissue of our bodies. Our attitude toward any task that we're concerned with. When we really get the feel of the importance of attitude, we find that it's involved with everything. Our attitude toward the people we love, our attitude toward the people we don't love, always ready to be questioned. And so, very fundamental. So, this is very much a part of our lives, everybody's life. How is it manifested? I used to, in my lectures, I used to talk about what a wonderful neurosurgeon, Russell Myers, used to show pictures in the seminars. What was called attitudinal set. We grow up with an attitudinal set. Here's an example. when I lived in Connecticut, next down the road, there was a little dog, a little beagle, and he was so peppy. He just loved to get around everything. He would jump up on people's tables, and he would chew up the children's socks, and he was always getting slapped, you see, for stop doing this and stop that. He was so cute, and he used to come over, and when I would get near him, I would call to him and want him to come to me, and his little tail would go under between his legs, and he would wonder, do I dare? Am I going to get slapped? And you can just see this little dog kind of closing in. And I explained, many of us go through life this way. We have been hurt maybe when we were little, and we pull back, and we're on the defensive, we're afraid. Attitudinal set. So we meet new situations that way without being without being open to them. We have built up expectations and hesitations. Now this can be exaggerated, or it can be just a little bit, but I guess many people approach everything that way. So this could be called an attitude. Our attitude involves expectations. After certain numbers of happenings, if they've been bad especially, we're going to get slapped. Do we dare? How are we going to react to that? So the work in sensory awareness helps us to become aware of how we are responding, how we have learned to respond, how we are meeting a new situation, how we are meeting this or that task, how we meet people. And it can be a great help. It's a tremendous help if we want to help ourselves, and we can be our own guides. We don't always have to have, we can't always have to have a teacher at our elbow telling us how to behave. We can learn to be our own guides, and this is one of the great strengths, I feel, of sensory awareness, that we can help ourselves. We can help other people too, but as a help to guide us every day of our lives, we always have this possibility. When we learn the principles and how it feels to be open to something, how it feels to be drawing away from something, we can get that feeling and question. And one of the things that I like about sensory awareness is that we can always question ourselves. Well, how about this? How am I meeting this? What are some other possibilities? How do I need to be? Could I be a little bit more open here? You see, we have learned to become aware and sensitive to how it feels inside of us and what is needed to give that up. And it takes maybe some time, long time, to finally give up, if that's what we want to do. You have to keep at it. But the satisfactions or helps along the way make everything a new discovery. And so you're always open for discovering something. And this again is an attitude, to be open to the feeling that here's a new discovery, a new experiment. This attitude of liking to experiment is not just one way to do this. There are many ways. And how can I develop this? So we learn that we don't have to follow just one particular specific repetitive way of doing something. We're always open to trying out something new. So I feel this is one way in which the sensory awareness can help us always to be awake and at least know that we're not awake.
You know, there are people who come to my classes and this is their first experience with sensory awareness. But they've had many, many opportunities to be in groups and discuss their emotions and their history and why because of they are as they are today. I'm wondering what you would say to all of that.
I have found personally that to asking him why do I do this and why do I do that, doesn't always lead to an answer. You get preoccupied with why do I do this? But suppose you do know why. All right? So this has happened 30 years ago. What about now? I did this because my mother used to say so. All right, but right now your mother isn't here, so what do you do? So we need to learn to acknowledge that this is what's happening. This is what ways in which we did respond. Probably it was a good way at that time. But what about now? So we have to learn to cope with right now. Fully acknowledging what happened before, being glad that you don't have the same circumstances perhaps, but now it's time to let go. It's not easy to let go once you build up a habit, but do we want to live in the present? So we have to stress acknowledging the past, but not identifying it with something that's happening now. This is easy to say, but it's not easy to change. So education and awareness is needed to learn to change. But I know that that's a question lots of people like to say. There's endless asking of why. Have you maybe had experiences with what works, with what you say?
Well, I've asked you this question more than on this tape, and you once suggested, how is it now? What are you aware of now? And a lot of times that's just enough to quietly bring people to here instead of wherever it was that they were. And I think that has been very helpful to me. And I would say that your way of speaking of it used to frustrate me a lot when people would be back then speaking of what happened there. And I didn't like it. But you helped me with my attitude that how is it? How is it for me to have that experience? And then, if I want to be in contact with the person, how can I meet them instead of resist what they're saying. 'Cause that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it's your bounce. I guess I would have to call it bounce, meaning that you never, in my experience of you, in classes, seeing you socially, seeing you accept an honor at the General Semantics meeting and so on, you don't overbounce and you don't fall flat. You don't drop life, and on the other hand, you don't overdo it. I know that when I ask you to look at something that I've written, and there's always something about and find more harmony and find joy, and that resilience of attitude and living has been a very great benefit to me.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I do think that I guess just assessing a situation, trying to feel what is needed in a situation is an attitude too of just asking ourselves what is needed in this situation. How can I help in this particular case? It brings up the great link, another great link between general semantics and sensory awareness, in that we don't identify something that did happen in the past with what is happening now, but treating each situation as a new situation. And you have probably heard me talk about one of my favorite quotations, but I'll mention it here. I don't remember the exact words altogether, but this is the gist of it. Because for me, it represents an attitude of always being ready for something new. It's about Gertrude Stein. In this fine book by Sutherland about Gertrude Stein, he quotes Gertrude Stein as saying, see how the quotation begins. Well, I'll just give part of it. She was going to give up. This is not quoting now. I'm talking about Gertrude Stein. She was considering, should she give up her way of seeing things. And Gertrude Stein said of herself, so then I said, and this is quote, so then I said I would begin again. I would not know what I knew about anything, about everything. And I would let come what will happen to come. End of quote. But I love that. I will begin again. So then I said, I will begin again. And here was this woman who had done so much and written so much and thought so much, had so many memories, saying to herself, so then I said, I will begin again. And if we can have this attitude of always being ready to begin again and let come what will happen to come, You see, it involves so much of not going around with preconceived ideas because you did something one way 2 years ago, 5, 10, 15 years ago, you should go on. But I said I would begin again. To be able to begin again and not do something because that's the way you did it always. That's the way your mother and your grandmother did it. How can I best function in now, 1999?
You know, I'm reminded of about 4 years ago, we were at the subway stop on 72nd and Broadway, and it was one of the windiest days of the year. You're a very slight person, and a big gust of wind came along, and I felt you were just going to be blown away. And you went up a little bit and came down, and you said, "Oh, how exhilarating."
That was 4 years ago. Yes. Well, it is. I find it so important to consider what we say to ourselves, let alone what we say to other people. As I walk along, the wind may come, and if I say to myself, "Oh, how terrible! Oh, how am I going to make this?" You know, our words to ourselves have an effect on ourselves. If I say to myself, "Ooh, this is terrible," well, how can I walk so that I can deal with it? That's a different attitude, because then I keep on going. But if I say to myself, "Oh, how awful, I wonder if I should go back," that's another attitude. So there's again where our attitude leads us into who knows where.
So, I'm just wondering, Charlotte, before we close, if there's anything that you would like to say in closing.
Well, one of the things I think of is being ready to begin again. Being ready to not talk so much, but how about living life? Life is lived on the silent level, and to be in touch with how things happen if we don't talk so much, but simply learn to be quiet inside and get a feel of how our organism responds. And so I'm very grateful for the work in sensory awareness, which has helped me so much in being able to meet and learn more about how I function, about how other people function. It's a never-ending process of discovery. So I really feel very grateful to have learned and to have stayed with it and to have made it a part of my life. And I'm happy to talk about this to anybody who would like to listen. So I thank you for asking me.
Bye-bye.